They said the Alpha King of Ashvale had ice in his veins instead of blood. They said he had never smiled, never wept, never once shown mercy to an enemy. What the legends never mentioned was that the girl he was about to marry carried a secret so dangerous it could burn his entire kingdom to the ground, and she carried it stitched into her own skin. If you love slow-burn fated mates, hidden royal bloodlines, and a queen who refuses to stay silent, settle in, because this is one you don't want to skip. Rain lashed against the carriage windows as it rattled over the frozen mountain pass toward Ashvale Keep. Mira Ashworth pressed her palm flat against the cold glass, watching the black pines blur past like ink bleeding across parchment. For 19 years, she had lived a lie so complete that even she sometimes forgot it wasn't the truth. Across from her sat her guardian, Lord Halvard Ashworth, a merchant lord who had raised her since infancy and who now studied her with the same calculating expression he used when appraising cargo. He had brokered this marriage as a business transaction. His adopted daughter traded to the most feared wolf king in the Northern Territories in exchange for trade rights, protection, and a border treaty that would keep his family safe for generations. He believed he was handing over a fragile human girl. He had no idea what slept beneath her skin. Hidden in the lining of her traveling cloak was a small clay vial, refilled every week by an old healer woman who asked no questions and demanded triple payment for her silence. Inside was a thick, bitter tonic, wolf's root, black nettle, and crushed silverleaf, brewed to mask a scent, a strength, and a hunger that Mira had spent her entire life burying. Because stitched into the skin over her left ribs, hidden from every eye but her own, was a mark shaped like a wolf howling inside a broken crown. It was the mark of the Moonfire line, the first royal bloodline of the wolves, a dynasty everyone believed had been wiped out 3 generations ago in a purge so brutal it was taught to children as a warning, not a history lesson. If the wolves of Ashvale ever discovered that mark, Mira wouldn't be married. She would be executed before sunset, because a living heir to the Moonfire throne was the one thing that could unite every splintered wolf clan against the current king, and no ruling alpha would allow that threat to breathe. The carriage jolted to a stop. Through the rain-streaked window, Ashvale Keep rose out of the mountainside like a blade driven into stone. Black towers, iron gates, banners the color of dried blood snapping in the wind. Mira stepped down onto the frozen courtyard, and even through the suppressant tonic thick in her blood, she felt it, a presence so massive, so overwhelming, that her human disguise nearly cracked on the spot. At the top of the stone steps stood King Cale Draven. He was built like something carved rather than born, tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair swept back from a face that looked like it had never once needed to soften itself. His eyes were a pale amber gold, the color of a wolf's eyes caught in torchlight, and when they landed on her, there was no warmth in them at all. Only assessment. Only calculation. Beside him stood his second-in-command, a scarred wolf named Commander Wren, and a striking woman with dark red hair named Lady Isolt, who looked at Mira the way a wolf looks at something it intends to eat later. "Lady Mira Ashworth," Cale said. His voice was low, rough, and it rolled through the courtyard like distant thunder. "You've traveled far for a wedding that neither of us asked for." "As have you, Your Majesty, for a bride you didn't choose," Mira answered, keeping her voice level even as her pulse hammered. Something flickered behind his amber eyes, surprise, maybe, that she hadn't cowered. "The ceremony is at moonrise," he said, turning away without another word. "Stay in the West Wing. Don't wander the halls alone. My wolves aren't known for their patience with strangers." As he walked off, Lord Halvard gripped Myra's elbow hard enough to bruise. "Remember why you're here," he hissed. "Be quiet. Be obedient. Give him no reason to send you back in pieces." Mira said nothing. She let the servants lead her through corridors of black stone, past howling wolf carvings and old battle tapestries, into a chamber with a roaring fireplace and a window that looked out over an ocean of frozen pine trees. She sat by the fire and drank the last of her tonic straight from the vial, grimacing at the ashen copper taste that had haunted her since she was 14 years old. "Survive the wedding," she told herself. "Survive the wedding, and figure out the rest later. She had no idea the wedding itself would be the easy part. Long before the carriage, before the treaty, before Lord Halvard had ever mentioned the name Ashvale, Mira had learned what it meant to disappear inside her own skin. She remembered being 9 years old, waking in the middle of the night with her nails lengthening into claws under the moonlight pouring through her window, and the healer woman being summoned in secret before dawn. She remembered being told, in a voice too calm for the words it carried, that if anyone outside these walls ever saw what she truly was, she would be killed before she understood why. She remembered learning to walk like a girl who startled easily, to eat like someone with a small appetite, to flinch at loud noises she could have silenced with a glance. She had built an entire second self out of small, careful lies, and she had worn that mask so long that some nights she genuinely couldn't tell where the performance ended and she began. The tonic had made that performance possible. It also cost her headaches that split behind her eyes, nights where her own bones ached from being told to stay small, a permanent hollow feeling like hunger that never eased no matter how much she ate. She had accepted all of it as the price of staying alive, the way one accepts the weather. She had never once let herself imagine what it might feel like to stop paying it. Now, alone in a stone chamber deep inside enemy territory, with her future husband a stranger, and her only weapon a fading vial of poison, she wondered, not for the first time, whether the day would ever come when hiding cost more than it saved. She didn't know yet that the answer was coming faster than she thought. The great hall of Ashvale kept blazed with candlelight by the time the ceremony began. Hundreds of wolves packed the stone benches, their eyes glinting gold and amber in the firelight, the air thick with roasted meat, pine smoke, and the heavy musk of shifted blood. Mira stood at the altar in a gown of deep charcoal silk, her hands folded in front of her to hide the slight tremor in her fingers. Kale stood beside her in dark ceremonial armor, unreadable as stone. There were no vows of love here. Wolf weddings weren't about affection. They were about binding, about power, about alliance sealed in blood and old magic. An elder priestess stepped forward, blind eyes clouded white, her arms marked with silver runes. In her weathered hands, she carried a cord of braided silver thread. Myra's stomach dropped. Silver. To a human, it would mean nothing. To a wolf, even a suppressed one, it was agony, a slow, searing burn that would only intensify the longer it touched skin. She had known the ceremony involved a binding cord. She had known it would be silver. The priestess wound the cord around their joined wrists, and fire erupted beneath Myra's skin. She bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, forcing her face into calm, practiced stillness while her wrists screamed beneath the fabric of her sleeve. Kale's eyes flicked down to their bound hands. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He could smell something, burning flesh, faint beneath the incense, and his gaze cut to her face, searching for pain. She gave him nothing. She stared straight ahead until the cord was finally removed, then slipped her scorched wrist into the folds of her skirt, letting the cool silk numb the blistered skin. When the ceremony ended, a deafening howl rose from the assembled wolves, shaking dust from the rafters. Mira felt something inside her chest answer that call, an old, buried instinct clawing at the inside of her ribs, desperate to howl back. She swallowed it whole. At the feast that followed, Mira picked at her food, terrified that wine might react badly, with the tonic still working through her blood. Lady Isolt, seated several chairs down, watched her with open contempt. "The little human bird barely eats," Isolt announced loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Tell me, my king, will you need to hand-feed her through the winter, or will she simply starve and save us the trouble?" Laughter rippled across the hall. Lord Halvard stiffened at a distant table, but said nothing. Mira set down her fork with deliberate calm. "I find," she said, loud enough to carry, "that creatures who gorge themselves without restraint are usually the first to grow slow, careless, and easy to outmaneuver, Lady Isolt. I'd rather keep my wits than my weight." A few low chuckles broke out from nearby wolves. Isolt's eyes flashed gold, her canines lengthening slightly beneath her sneer, but before she could respond, the massive doors at the end of the hall slammed open. A gust of freezing wind tore through the room, snuffing half the candles. The rowdy celebration died instantly, replaced by a silence so sharp it felt like a blade. Four figures stood in the doorway, cloaked in gray, faces hidden behind rough iron masks. The smell hit the room a second later. Unwashed, feral, soaked in old blood. Rogue wolves. Assassins. Commander Ren roared, already moving, sword drawn. The hall exploded into chaos. The masked wolves moved with terrible, unnatural speed, cutting past scrambling guards, heading straight for the high table. The lead assassin vaulted over a bench, a jagged silver blade flashing toward Kale's throat. Kale turned fast, claws already extending, but a second assassin flung a weighted net laced with silver dust over him. He roared in fury and pain as the toxic fibers burned against his skin, momentarily tangled. The first assassin lunged again, blade aimed at the unprotected king. Mira didn't think. 19 years of careful human conditioning shattered in half a heartbeat. She grabbed a silver carving knife from the platter beside her and threw herself between the assassin and the king. The blow that should have snapped a human woman's arm in half instead met unnatural resistance. Her muscles hardened, her reflexes sharpened beyond anything human. She twisted the assassin's wrist, wrenched the blade free, and drove her own knife up beneath his ribs in one clean motion. He collapsed, choking, off the edge of the table. The remaining three were torn down seconds later by Run and the royal guard. But the hall had gone deathly silent around the high table, every eye locked on Mira, standing over a dead assassin, breathing hard, a shallow cut on her forearm already knitting itself closed beneath torn silk. She clamped her other hand over the wound too late. Kale tore free of the ruined net, chest heaving, amber eyes locked on her with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and seized her wrist, the same wrist still blistered raw from the silver ceremony cord. He turned it over, exposing skin that should have been torn and bleeding. It was smooth, whole, healed. No human does that, Kale said quietly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that only she could hear. No human moves like that. No human heals like that. The tonic, burned through by adrenaline and blood loss, was finally failing. And with it, the scent she'd hidden her entire life began to rise, sharp, wild, ancient, unmistakably wolf. Kale dragged her from the hall without another word, his grip like iron around her wrist, though never cruel. The moment the heavy doors of his private chambers slammed shut behind them, he rounded on her, backing her against the cold stone near the hearth. "What are you?" he demanded, voice shaking the goblets on a nearby table. He planted a hand on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. A human doesn't heal from a silver wound in seconds. A human doesn't disarm a trained rogue. And a human does not carry a scent that makes every instinct in my body want to either bare its throat to her or claim her outright. Myra's chest heaved. The last of the tonic was burning out of her system fast now, and with it came a decade of buried instinct clawing to the surface all at once. Her bones ached with the need to shift, to let moonlight finally touch her real skin. She looked up at him and made a choice. "I am the weapon my guardian never knew he was raising," she said, her voice dropping, threaded with a low resonance that wasn't entirely human. Lord Halvard believed he adopted an orphaned merchant's daughter. He found me as an infant near the ruins of the old northern shrine, wrapped in a blanket soaked in wolf's blood. He never knew what I was. He only knew I had to be kept hidden. Kale's gaze dropped to the torn silk at her shoulder, to the edge of a tightly wound binding beneath it. Without asking, his claws extended and sliced cleanly through the fabric wrap, freeing it in one motion. Mira gasped, instinctively covering herself, but Kale's hand caught her wrists, holding them still, firm, but not painful. There, over her ribs, was the mark. A howling wolf trapped inside a broken crown. Kale went utterly still. Every wolf pup in the Northern Territories grew up hearing stories of that symbol, the Moonfire line, the first royal bloodline from which every current alpha house had descended, wiped out generations ago in a purge so thorough that finding a survivor was considered the stuff of myth, not memory. "The first blood," he whispered. "Your moonfire." He stepped back as though he'd realized too late he was standing too close to an open flame. "You're the rightful sovereign of every pack from here to the southern border. I'm a prisoner who has poisoned herself every single day since I was 14 to avoid being slaughtered by kings exactly like you," Mira snapped, years of swallowed anger finally breaking loose. Her eyes flickered, human brown bleeding into a molten gold. "If your court finds out what I am, they'll tear me apart to remove the threat, or worse, they'll use me to legitimize whichever alpha manages to claim me first. I saved your life tonight, Kale. Don't make me regret it." Kale's jaw tightened. The political weight of what she'd just told him was staggering. If the Council of Northern Alphas learned the truth, it could ignite a war across every territory in the north. But as he looked at her, furious, glowing, radiant with power she'd spent her whole life suppressing, something else slammed into him. A pull he'd felt only as a faint, easily ignored whisper since the wedding cord first touched their skin now roared to full, undeniable life. She wasn't only a lost queen. She was his mate. "Whoever let those assassins into my hall didn't want me dead," Kale said slowly, his tactical mind catching up to the shock. "If they wanted me dead, they wouldn't have wasted the first strike on my new bride's side of the table. They wanted you dead, in a way that looked like collateral damage. Someone wanted the wedding to fail before it could be sealed." Myra's golden eyes narrowed. "Lady Isolt. She's coveted this throne for years," Kale growled, pacing now, his aura darkening with barely leashed fury. "She believed if the human bride died in the chaos, the council would pressure me to take a proper wolf mate instead. She never imagined the bride she was trying to kill was the one person in this keep more dangerous than she'll ever be. Then she made the worst mistake of her life," Mira said softly, rolling her shoulders as the last of the tonic finally cleared her blood entirely. Power settled into her limbs like something coming home. "Because I am done hiding from wolves who think fear makes them kings." Kale studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his amber eyes, the careful calculation of a warlord giving way, slowly, to something closer to respect. "If we accuse Isolt without proof strong enough to silence her allies, her supporters in the council will call it a king protecting his new mate out of weakness. They'll say I'm hiding behind a woman's skirts." "Then we don't accuse her," Mira said. "We let her accuse herself." "Explain." "Every noble house keeps its ledgers locked, but rogue mercenaries are paid in coins stamped with a house seal. It's tradition, so the money can be traced back if a contract is broken and a debt needs collecting. Whoever hired those men didn't pay them in nameless silver. They paid them in marked coin, because feral wolves don't trust promises from strangers." "Search the bodies." "Search wherever your men store confiscated effects. If Isolt is careless enough to still believe herself untouchable, the proof already exists. We only have to find it before she does." Kale's mouth curved, faint and humorless, but real. "You think like a general." "I was raised by a merchant who taught me to read a ledger before I could read a bedtime story," Mira said. "It turns out watching men lie about profit margins for 19 years is excellent training for watching wolves lie about murder." He almost smiled at that, the barest twitch at the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it came. He sent Ren to search the dead assassins and the tower vaults before the sun had fully risen, and by the time gray morning light filtered through the chamber windows, the commander returned with a small leather ledger and 3 coins stamped with a crimson wolf's head crest, Isolt's own house sigil. Kale turned the coin over in his fingers, jaw tightening. She really did think herself untouchable. "Power does that to people," Mira said quietly. "It convinces them the rules exist for everyone but themselves. I intend to remind her otherwise in front of the entire council." Dawn broke over Ashvale, keeping streaks of blood red and gold across the snow. By sunrise, word of the attack had spread through every corridor of the fortress, and Lady Isolt had wasted no time turning the story to her advantage. She called an emergency tribunal in the great council chamber, a vast amphitheater carved from black stone, demanding the reckless human bride, answer for bringing violence into the sacred halls of Ashvale. Her plan was simple: frame Mira for the attack, force her execution, and pressure Kale into a new, properly bred, alliance before the week was out. The iron doors groaned open. Silence fell instantly as Kale strode in, radiating a crushing authority that pressed down on every wolf in the chamber. He took his seat on the throne of black iron and antler bone, his amber eyes locking onto Isolde with a coldness that could have frozen the marrow in her bones. Then came the second wave of silence, deeper, stranger, as Mira walked in behind him. She wore no bridal silk this time. Her gown had been traded for a fitted tunic of dark leather, built for movement rather than display. Her hair fell loose and wild around her shoulders. Her eyes, no longer dulled by tonic, blazed with a molten, unmistakable gold. Isolde sneered, stepping forward. "What is this mockery, my king? You bring the human traitor before us dressed for battle. My people have already found the truth. It was House Ashworth who paid those rogues to strike at you and weaken our borders." Mira didn't wait for Kale to answer. She descended the stone steps herself, her movements so fluid, so unmistakably predatory, that the surrounding alphas instinctively leaned away from her without understanding why. The air in the chamber seemed to thin. "You speak of treason, Isolde," Mira said, and her voice carried an odd double resonance, as though something ancient were speaking alongside her. "Yet it was your seal found on the rogue's payment ledger, hidden in the Eastern Tower strongbox. You thought a quiet human girl would be an easy kill. You thought I was prey." A murmur rolled through the gathered alphas as Commander Rin stepped forward and laid the marked coins and the small leather ledger on the stone floor before the throne, exactly where every noble in the chamber could see the crimson wolf's head crest stamped into the silver. Isolde's confident sneer faltered for the first time. "Explain to this council why rogue mercenaries were found carrying coin from your own treasury, Lady Isolde," Kale said, his voice carrying no anger now, only the flat, final tone of a king pronouncing sentence. "Explain why your seal appears in a payment ledger dated 3 days before my wedding." "Forgeries," Isolde spat, though her voice had lost its earlier certainty. "Lies, planted by a human desperate to save her own throat. You are prey," Isolde snarled a moment later, composure finally cracking entirely, her hands twisting into clawed shapes. "You are nothing but human filth playing dress-up in a wolf's court." She lunged, jaw unhinging, canines bared for Myra's throat. Mira didn't raise a weapon. She didn't need to. She simply let go of the invisible chains she'd carried since childhood. A wave of pure, ancient dominance rolled off her body, not the localized authority of a single alpha, but the deep genetic imperative of the very first bloodline every wolf in that room descended from. When Mira spoke again, it wasn't a shout. It was a command that reached into the oldest part of every wolf's instinct. "Kneel." The effect was instant and total. Isolde slammed face first into the stone floor as her own biology overrode her fury, forced into absolute submission. Around the amphitheater, hardened alphas, men who had carved out territories through decades of brutal war, dropped to their knees, gasping, some whimpering involuntarily as something buried deep in their blood recognized its true sovereign. Even Commander Rin, stationed at the doors, sank to one knee, head bowed. Only Kale remained standing because his power didn't break beneath hers. It resonated with it. 2 bloodlines, one built through conquest and one carried through legacy, meeting as equals for the first time in centuries. Mira walked to where Isolde lay trembling. "You want to show the king what a true wolf looks like," she said quietly, her golden eyes glowing like twin flames. "But you forgot the old law. The North answers to the crown. And the crown has always belonged to the first line." She hauled Isolde up by the collar and shoved her toward the waiting guards. "Take her to the lowest cell. She'll stand trial for treason against her king and her queen." As Isolde was dragged away sobbing, Mira turned to face the kneeling chamber. The mark beneath her collarbone seemed to catch the torchlight, glowing faintly through her tunic. Kale descended the steps toward her, his expression somewhere between fierce pride and something far more possessive. When he reached her, He didn't demand submission. Instead, the coldest king in the north went down on one knee before her, took her hand, and pressed his lips to her knuckles in front of every alpha in the room. "My mate," he said, voice carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. "My queen." The era of hidden bloodlines and quiet suppression was over. The Moonfire line had returned, not broken, not hunted, but standing beside the throne rather than beneath it. And together, the once untouchable king and the long-buried queen would build something no rival house, no ancient grudge, and no silver blade would ever be able to tear apart. Weeks later, on the night of the first full moon since the trial, Mira stood on the highest balcony of Ashvale Keep, moonlight spilling silver across her bare shoulders for the first time in her life, without a drop of suppressant in her blood. Cale found her there, watching the pale light pour over the frozen pines. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Only that I spent 19 years poisoning myself to survive people like the ones who used to sit at my own council table," Mira said. "I won't do it again. Not for you. Not for them. Not for anyone." Cale turned her gently to face him, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "You won't have to," he said. "The North kneels to you now." "So do I." Below them, the pack held up at the full moon, no longer a sound of warning or conquest, but of celebration. Somewhere in that chorus, Mira finally let her own voice rise to answer it, wild and unashamed, for the very first time. 3 days later, Ashvale Keep held its first true coronation in over 100 years. Banners of black and silver, the old Moonfire colors, rediscovered in a dust-covered archive beneath the West Tower, hung from every wall alongside Ashvale's crimson. Nobles from territories that had never once sent envoys to a royal wedding arrived in droves, some out of genuine loyalty, most out of the very human fear of being on the wrong side of history when the first bloodline reclaimed its place at the head of the table. Mira stood at the top of the same stone steps where she had first arrived as a frightened girl in borrowed silk, and this time she wore a crown forged from black iron and moonstone, the wolf and crown mark on her collarbone left deliberately uncovered for the first time in her life. Lord Halvard stood among the crowd, his expression somewhere between shock and quiet, dawning pride. When their eyes met across the courtyard, Mira offered him the smallest nod, not forgiveness exactly, but an acknowledgement that whatever his reasons had been, he had, without ever meaning to, delivered her to the one place in the world where she no longer had to hide. As the elder priestess placed the crown fully upon her head, and Cale took his place beside her, not above her, not behind her, but beside her, a low murmur ran through the gathered crowd, and then, one by one, every alpha present bent the knee without being commanded to. Later that night, alone on the balcony once more, Cale pulled her against his chest, his voice low against her hair. "There'll be packs in the south who won't accept a queen so easily. Some will test you. Some will come for that crown the same way Isolde did." "Let them come," Mira said, watching the moonlight ripple over the pines below. "I spent 19 years being underestimated. I have a great deal of patience left for anyone foolish enough to try it twice." The lost queen had come home, and the empire she and Cale would build together would be one no ancient enemy, no jealous court, and no buried secret could ever bring down again. If this story of a hidden royal bloodline, a ruthless alpha king, and a fated queen who refused to stay silent kept you hooked until the very last word, smash that like button, subscribe for more werewolf romance and fantasy sagas, and drop a comment telling me what you want to see happen next in Mira and Cale's story. Your support helps this channel keep bringing you these full-length dramatic tales every week.